Okay. Hello, hello, hello. I am about a minute early, so I will not start until my clock actually says 8:30, and we'll give people time to log in and join. And I see people are logging in now. So once the clock hits 8:30, we'll begin and with a brief introduction, a lovely little medical disclaimer, and then we'll get to your questions. So, all right. It's 8:30 Central Standard Time. So let's start. Welcome to the first ever, and hopefully the first of many more, fasting work girl chats. So my name is Cecily Ann Ganhart. I am a maternal fetal medicine physician, also known as a perinatologist or high-risk obstetrician. And I practice in Kansas. I became interested in obesity medicine after my own struggles with weight loss. Like many of you tuning in, I would experience temporary weight loss and then only to regain much of what I'd lost, or oftentimes I would end up being higher than my starting weight. So after the birth of my second son, that's when I reached my highest adult weight. And that was in 2014. And at the time of his birth, I was 264 pounds. So that was, not too far from the 300-pound mark. And I was like, okay, so I have to do something. But that was in 2014. So I started multiple weight loss programs, different things. And in 2017, I reached, in the winter of 2017, I reached my lowest weight since the birth of my second son, and that was 202 pounds, and that was through a guided weight loss program through my employer at the time. And I was so excited. I was like, I'm finally about to get under 200 pounds, and then the weight just started coming back on, and I swore I was following the plan up and down, and it just seemed like no matter what I did. So then by the summer of 2017, I was back up to over 230. I quit weighing myself at that point, honestly. And then I was like, all right, something has to change. So right now, I've been having my longest sustained weight loss success. So remember I said that was back in the summer of 2017 when I, made another attempt. And right before Christmas, before I went to visit my parents, I reached my lowest weight in over 10 years, and that was 179. So I won't be stepping back on the scale until after New Year's because my mom and dad like to cook. So what changed? So in 2017, I came across a book, and it was titled The Obesity Code by Dr. Jason Fung, a Canadian nephrologist who's turned obesity medicine physician. And basically, it discussed intermittent fasting and presented obesity more as a disease rather than a lack of willpower or being lazy. And so I dove headfirst into intermittent fasting while also taking time to learn more about nutrition. So the next book after intermittent fasting that I read was a book called Deep Nutrition by Dr. Kate Shanahan. And that talked about a more ancestral approach to eating. And that basically means eating whole, real foods. So that's just my little background. Before we get into answering your questions, I have to give my lovely little disclaimer. And the disclaimer is that I'm not your physician. So I'm going to say that again. I'm not your doctor. And the information in this chat, future chats, on my webpage, on my Instagram page, on Twitter, YouTube, wherever you find me, it's for informational purposes only. So you should consult your own care provider for questions specific to your situation. I'm going to answer questions in a more generalized format. However, my answers are not specific to your personal situation or your medical advice. So, and it's not medical advice. So now that we've gotten out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into answering the questions. I may have to break this up into 2 episodes because I don't think that you're going to continue to listen to me for more than 30 minutes. And it's a lot of good information. So we're going to jump right into it. Our first question is from Megala 1972. And the question is, does intermittent fasting work without cutting carbs totally? So yes, that is my answer. And I'm going to go off on a little bit of tangent, and I apologize, but let's talk about low carb just for a second. So when someone says they're low carb, that doesn't mean they're completely eliminating all carbs. Some people choose to, but you don't have to do that to be low carb. So if we look at the current, and I'm based in Kansas in the United States, so I'm going to reference a lot of the US guidelines just because that's where I live, that's what I'm familiar with. But current U.S. guidelines suggest that eating between 200 to almost 400 grams of carbs a day is fine. But many of us are starting to disagree with that. And it's important to recognize that these initial recommendations were not based on evidence. They were not based on science. And if we want to get a little more technical, you actually don't need carbs to live. So no, you don't. Your liver, through a process called gluconeogenesis, where that basically is gluco means glucose, sugar, neogenesis means to form or to make. Assuming that you're metabolically healthy, your body can make all of the glucose that you need to survive. So if we think about it for a second, having a dietary recommendation for a macronutrient that where we're saying it's required that you eat so much of this, but it's not required for your body to live, that actually doesn't make sense. And it can, so then now you can extrapolate and really see why a lot of the recommendations, current dietary recommendations really don't make sense. Now, I didn't say that eating carbohydrates don't have health benefits. But we really have to distinguish between the type of carbohydrates we are looking at. So there's processed carbs and there's carbs that come from Mother Earth. And I would suggest that you consume carbs. The bulk of them come from Mother Earth. Not packaged, processed, line the shelves, the pantries, or when you read the ingredient label, have a list of ingredients that you need to take organic chemistry to understand what they are. So, final tangent point on that is just that I want everyone to be aware of that. The American Diabetes Association just released updated guidelines regarding carbohydrate restriction in the treatment for diabetes. So that's huge. The official recommendations now from the American Diabetes Association is that people with diabetes limit their carbohydrate intake to 130 grams of carbs or less a day. That is very doable. You can still live your life beautifully eating 130 grams of carbs. So basically the short answer of all of that is you do not have to eliminate carbohydrates with fasting to lose weight. But I personally think just in general, people would benefit from reducing their amount of total carbohydrates, trying to keep it less than 130 gram carbs a day, and making sure that the carbs you eat are coming from whole natural foods, not processed. So the next question is, what to do after a day that I take a break from being carb free? So I'm going to not try to beat the nail over coffin or whatever, but I'm assuming you're talking about junk food, because at least to my knowledge, no one's ever developed diabetes or died from eating too many Brussels sprouts or broccoli. But if you have that case report, DM it to me. Happy to read it. So we're gonna just assume we're talking about the high sugar, high starch, lots of breads, pastas, etc. And so when we're human, we all slip up. So this is basically what I do to get myself back on track, and you can modify it as you see fit. But what works for me is, number one, first I just, acknowledge what I ate and affirm that this was an exception to the rule. So it's not an everyday thing. It's not a weekly thing. Maybe I went out of town and, somebody decided to make apple pie, mom, and I ate some, that's life. I'm not going to beat myself up about it. And that goes on to step number 2, which is don't beat yourself up about it, right? We're trying to create appropriate relationship with food. So that's what we want to do. And so if you're going to beat yourself up every time you do something, then that's not going to be beneficial as you try to reestablish a healthy relationship with true food. So again, acknowledge slip-ups. There are times to celebrate. There are times where you're going to veer off plan. As long as it's, and at least in my mind, for myself, isn't a weekly occurrence, it's not going to derail your long-term goals. You can bounce back. And then 3, I tighten up my fasting window. So after I've, acknowledged, affirmed, all of that good stuff, then I get back on track with fasting. So right now I do typically mainly water. I will use coffee, tea, or bone broth. I've cut down on the coffee and up my bone broth just because bone broth has collagen and some other things that are healthy for joint health, hair, and other things to keep your skin glistening. So I do tend to do water and bone broth now. So for example, if my fasting window for the week was my eating window for the week was between 12 p.m. to 7 p.m., that's probably more like a summer regimen for me because I really try to eat before the sun sets. And maybe in future episodes, we'll get into that. So what I may do is tighten my fasting window or my eating window from 10 a.m. and have my last meal by 4 p.m. and no snacking in between. And then I dial back on the carbs. I give my liver time to get out all of that excess sugar that I've stored in the form of glycogen. And I will aim for 75 grams of total carbs a day or less. So that's what I do to kind of bounce back. And it seems to work for me. So the next question comes from Penny Saves. And her question was, do you fast daily? Pretty much. I would say that I may not fast for maybe 3 to 5 times a month. And even during those times when I'm not fasting, and we're going to say fasting, meaning that I've went at least 16 to 18 hours since my last meal, I'm still not snacking in between. That's what I really think has helped me. I don't graze anymore throughout the day. I don't try to have 6 or 7 different small meals. If I'm going to eat, I eat. And if I'm not eating, I don't. And that's kind of how I go about it. So Lady Leo _7 asks, how long does it take to adjust? Everyone's different, so I don't necessarily have a textbook answer for that. I definitely have an answer, just kind of what I've experienced, but I think it really depends on how many processed carbs and just how many total carbohydrates a day you were consuming. So for instance, if you are closer to that 300 to 400 grams of carbs a day, yeah, you're gonna have the keto flu. The keto flu, even though you're not necessarily trying to get into ketosis, it's just what we call basically your body trying to switch over from always being in a state of burning glucose for fuel to actually burning fat. And sometimes you'll get a little headache. Like I said, I just came back from my parents' house, and yesterday I had a headache. I was like, okay, yeah, I ate a lot of carbs while I was there. Now today I don't have a headache anymore, but remember, I've also been fat adapted for a while. So some people will experience kind of a keto flu up to about, a week after initiating, but it does get better. You just have to plug through. And so that's why maybe taking a more gradual approach in the beginning, especially if you have been highly dependent on carbs for a long time, may help just make the journey a little more pleasurable for you. So the next question I have is from Nariah Rain. And her question is, I've started intermittent fasting and only eat from 11 a.m. to 3 or 4 p.m. Is that good? So, yep, I think so, especially since it's the winter time. So we have to realize that we do have something called a circadian rhythm where our hormones and etc. change depending, basically you have different levels when the sun's up versus sun set. And so once it's dark, we tend to have a greater insulin response, even if eating the same meal. So for example, what that means is take a meal that you would have eaten at 3 p.m., eat that same meal at 9 p.m., and you're going to spike your insulin more. And if we're into the theory that insulin resistance and the spiking of insulin multiple times causes us to retain weight, then you don't want to spike your insulin your endogenous insulin, by the way, meaning the insulin that you have inside of you that you make. You don't want that going up multiple times, a day or to a high amount. Also, which this, I'll be posting more about this on my website, www.fastingworkgirl.com. Quick plug. Anyway, so I'll be posting more about an article that basically showed that obese participants who shifted their eating window earlier and basically stopped eating at night, just simply by making that change, was able to lose a significant amount of weight. So night eating, really try to cut that out. Naraya Rain, I think what you're doing sounds amazing. So the next person I have is Ampervez 94. And this question's a good one. So how do you deal? They're all good. So this one deals with emotional eating. And so how do you deal with emotional eating? So I'll tell you how I deal with it. I still from time to time struggle with that. But I think for me, it's important to identify the root cause of the stress that is causing you to eat. So what are your triggers? And you can do that by journaling and just taking time to be mindful. But what is it? So is it, you get into an argument with a coworker, same coworker every day, and they just frustrate you to no end. And you come home and you want a brownie, and that's your habit every day. And you feel better when you eat the brownie, right? Is that your trigger? Whatever your trigger is, you need to figure out another way to deal with it. And so my friend actually, Jilinthia, hi Jill, recommended a program to me called Insight Timer. And basically, Insight Timer is a mobile app. It's free, and it teaches you how to meditate. And for a lot of us, we did not grow up meditating. I did not. And when we hear about meditation, we're picturing ourselves cross-legged. But there's so much more to it than that. It actually does have health benefits. And so what has helped me is that whenever I get stressed, if my normal mechanism was to either go grab junk food or have a glass of wine or whatever that be, now I just take a pause and do a quick 1-minute meditation, calm myself down, and then I get up and go do something else. And that works for me. You will have to play around to see what works for yourself, but I definitely recommend getting the Insight Timer. And just for your overall stress, again, stress spikes cortisol. Cortisol is related to insulin. Like all of that stuff is intertwined. And so it's no, coincidence that a lot of us are stressed and overweight. So I would say trying that first and seeing how that does. And if you can kind of shift away from eating for comfort. So the next question comes from Rutha Daisy 208. And Ruth's question is, how do I hasten weight loss using intermittent fasting? It seems I've stalled. So this is definitely something that people come across. And there are different fasting regimens that seem to predispose more to a stall. Not sure if you're doing 1 meal a day or if you're doing the same 16-8 schedule 7 days a week. But, our bodies are intelligent. And the reason I mention those two is because those, after a while, can kind of have a stall in weight loss. But our bodies are intelligent. We're not here by accident. We are designed to adapt. And so the author of the Obesity Code, as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Jason Fung, in his clinic, he actually discusses about, especially if you're doing 1 meal a day chronically for a long time, how it's very hard to consume an adequate amount of calories in one large sitting. And so what basically happens over time is your body starts to think you are doing caloric restriction. And so then it sets its metabolism to such that it's just becoming more efficient and can live off the fewer calories. So changing it up is helpful. So for instance, if rather than doing, 1 meal a day every day, 7 days a week, maybe do 1 meal a day a few days a week, and then do, 18-hour fast, a couple other days a week. Just try to switch up your routine. If you are doing a 16-8, that is fasting for 16 hours with an 8-hour window, maybe try pushing that window and doing 18-hour fasting. And then also play around with your window. So a lot of people do, like a 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. But, maybe try doing a 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Take advantage of, the circadian rhythm. Tighten that window a little bit. So those could be things there. Some people will throw in a 36-hour fast, a couple times a month, which I know that sounds crazy. What? 36 hours without food? But, there are all sorts of different protocols what people do and have great success. So I think the key is just try to change it up every so often, so that your body isn't getting used to what you're doing. But for maintenance, 1 meal a day, a few times a week is awesome. And so is 16-8. But right now I think you're trying to still lose more weight, as I read from your question. So you may need to, change it up a little bit. The other thing is, what does your nutrition look like? So that's the thing. And we have to keep going back to nutrition, because if you eat just a lot of processed foods during your eating window, you're undoing your fast. Like you really are. So fasting is not a free for all. And I know there's a lot of people who are like, just, fast and then eat whatever you want, but that's really not the point. And so you may want to track your macros if you've never done that before. I don't tend to track now. I don't log, at this point, I stay away from processed foods, and it works for me. But if you have no idea kind of what your carb level's at, you may want to track your macronutrients and see how many carbohydrates you are consuming. And if you're over 130 gram carbs a day, try to decrease that to under 130 gram carbs a day. And then you can, hopefully eliminate some of the processed foods or decrease them. So the next question I have is, do you meal plan? And it's sort of, it's not the typical, when you see the Instagram pictures of like this, 24 packages laid out all nicely pretty or whatever. I don't do that. I just don't. But I do cook in bulk a couple times a week. So that's kind of our meal planning. I usually work through lunch most days, or now actually, I try to get in a brisk walk or do something active at lunch. So at that point, most days I don't eat lunch at work. And so that helps. Now, I am thinking of purchasing an Instapot in the next few weeks. Maria Emmerich just released a book called Keto Instapot, which is low carb recipes that are quick to make. Like you could cook them all in like 20 minutes or less. And so I may explore that just to give myself and my family a little more variety than the bulk meals. But that's the extent of my meal planning. The next question is, what can best replace white bread on a day-to-day routine? So I'm biased. I would say nothing because I go months literally without eating bread, and I don't miss it. And I don't know, I just don't think bread is something that's required, but it's going to be hard to quit cold turkey. So I would gradually phase it out of the diet until you find yourself first being able to go a week without bread, then 2 weeks to months. And then that way, when you do decide to have bread, say someone, in your life makes just the best homemade banana bread ever and they baked you just a loaf, eat it. Again, this is all about true moderation. What I do, though, to just get around bread is I do a lot of substitutes. And basically, I substitute lettuce for a lot of things, lettuce wraps. So I'll do lettuce wraps tacos. I'll do lettuce for my hamburger. And it's really tasty, and that works for me. So, but if you don't want to cut out white bread completely, because again, you don't have to do that, I would just look at and see what your total like macros are, and then, find a way to try to get that down to less than 130 grams of carbs, and then go from there. So the next question is, how many hours is your eating window? So usually I would say about 6 hours. But keep in mind, during those 6 hours, I'm still not grazing. So, I have a pretty tight eating window. Yesterday I actually had a 3-hour, eating window. I had 2 separate small meals. And that's just my post-holiday window. Cause I'm tightening up a little bit. So, but my normal window is about, 6 hours. I try to have a pretty strict window. So we actually, wow, I can't believe we made it in time. I said I was going to keep this to 30 minutes, and I'm on the last question. So there were 11 questions submitted ahead of time, and that seems to be the perfect amount for today. And I think this is the best place to end. It's, where do I start? What are good resources to begin? And this question was from Patricia. So basically, the resources that I recommend are the Obesity Code. I can't say that enough. I think people just really are looking for people just to spoon feed the information, just say, well, this is what you do, and if you do this, it'll work. I really think you need to read the Obesity Code for yourself, because you need to understand the mechanisms of obesity and disease. And if you understand it, then it makes sense as to why you're doing intermittent fasting. But if you don't understand it, you're gonna, let other people talk you out of it, or say it's crazy or whatever. So I really think you have to, you got to read it. So if you don't want to read it, Dr. Jason Fung, Fung, has a plethora of YouTube videos. So just Google him and start watching his YouTube videos. And that'll kind of help give you a Cliff Notes version, though I still think you should read the book. Once you understand kind of the premise behind intermittent fasting, then I would say you need to dive down into nutrition. Oh, I also forgot to mention that, the Obesity Code is available on Audible and other audiobooks. So I listened to the book driving to work. So yes, good point. Try to maximize, your time. But anyway, so after that, I would say get into finding out more about low carb and ancestral based approaches to eating. Ancestral, again, means that you're eating food from the earth. And I think that's what all of these diets or way of eating have in common, whether it's more plant-based, whether it's carnivore, low carb, keto, Mediterranean diet. People are eating real food. Our body knows what to do with real food. It doesn't know what to do with food like substances. And so you pick the real food diet that works for you. www.dietdoctor.com is an excellent website with many free resources if you're interested in trying a lower carb approach. Also, www.idm as in Mary program.com has a free 12-week fasting course. And I'm not sponsored by any of these sites. These are just helpful resources. And then you may want to try intermittent fasting right before you actually finish all of the books. So these are just my several tips that are quick to begin. So we have to realize that the average U.S. adult consumes 142 pounds of sugar a year. That's ridiculous. That's far more than what our bodies were designed to handle. So what you can do, let's try these easy steps. They're just simple steps while you're learning more about intermittent fasting that you can try. So cut out sugary drinks. Yes, even if it says diet, put down the pop, put down things supplemented with agave nectar. Just no. Try water. Try water, but definitely try to cut out your juices, things like that. You can drink unsweetened tea if you need to switch it up. Drink bone broth if you want to switch it up. There's lots of things you can do, but you got to cut out the sugary drinks. Cut out the packaged snacks. And when I say cut out, week 1, reduce. If you used to have 4 pops a day, cut that to 2. The next week, cut it to 1. Third week, you're off a pop. So again, work on reducing. If the ingredients on the package have 3 to 4 items or more, and you feel like you need a master's in organic chemistry to understand it, stop eating that. Try to minimize snacking altogether, but if you must snack, then choose whole real foods. Then number 3, try increasing the amount of proteins and healthy fats on your plate. So if you're vegetarian, you can still do vegetarian-based proteins. But rather than filling up on extra bread and pasta when you're hungry, try to increase the amount of green leafy vegetables that you're eating rather than starchy vegetables. Also, if you do eat meat, go back for more meat. Vary your meat. You can try locally grass-fed, is always going to be the best. If you don't have access to that, you try fish. That's really good. And see if you can find farm-raised eggs. Those are also great sources of protein. And then step 4, this is where we're getting into the intermittent fasting part. Try to have your last meal of the day no later than 7 p.m. It's dark outside now, though, so again, you're going to be gradually adjusting. But if you can move that up to 6 and then 5, because it's getting dark early. And have your first meal of the day no earlier than 9 or 10 a.m. This will slowly introduce you to intermittent fasting, and then you can gradually try to shrink your window 1 to 2 days a week and play around with various times. Avoid night eating. This throws off our circadian rhythm. And with that, we're trending with 3 people saying try water as the new hashtag. Let's make a post about that tomorrow. That wraps it up. So hey, let me know how you like this format. We're going to do this weekly. We're going to start bringing you different healthcare providers talking about how various medical conditions affect or how obesity affects various medical conditions. Have some specialists talking to us, some primary care physicians. I basically want to show you that, physicians, we get a bad rap that we're not into, integrative medicine. And so many of us are. So just have that conversation with us in a clinic setting. Now, we'll do this Q&A format once a month to every 6 weeks. You will submit your questions ahead of time. I'll put stickers up, so follow me on the Insta stories. I'll try to review the questions that were submitted tonight, and I'll answer those on the next session. And thank you for tuning in. God bless. Have a great week, and Happy fasting. See you later.